I don't have time to pray. How many times have you said that? I mean, I say it on a regular basis. Like, I wish I had more time for it. Guys, I got to do a gut check with you here. When you say that, and when I say that, we're forgetting how important prayer is. I've never woken up in the morning and said, I don't have time to breathe. I would die, right? You have to breathe. Spiritually, you have to pray. It's like breath for the soul. You need that. Otherwise, you jump into your life, into your day, like a graceless mess, right? And when you don't take that time to prayer, oh my gosh, the amount of time I have wasted in my life because I haven't had time to pray and think straight about all the other stuff that I'm doing. But not only that, if you look at society, as we wander from God or fall into practical atheism, where we wander from the practice of our faith and prayer and contemplation, having an intimate connection with our Father who loves us, it's killing us. You look at stats among teenagers who even believe, but I think many of whom have stopped praying, stopped contemplating, too dang busy. And it's literally killing kids. We're going to dive into all that. The impact of the lack of prayer, the importance of prayer, teen culture, and how Jesus prayed. We're going to give you some mind-blowing insights for what his prayer life may have looked like with a dear friend and scripture scholar, Scott Powell, who's with us. Thank you guys for being with us today. Scott, it is so good to be with you, man.
What's up, Chris? Thanks for having me.
Dude, I don't know what's going to happen in this podcast because we're in a small group together.
It's a TV show, but that's
right.
Fair enough. Podcast, TV show.
But yeah, no, we podcast, TV, yeah, whatever you want to call these things now. Actually, we just did my Just Audio podcast,
yes.
Spooning with Chris, the disturbingly intimate podcast.
It was a small couch. It was a really small couch.
Lord have mercy. All. Okay, me and Scott know each other, obviously. We have a monthly small group together. Yeah. We could do a whole other show, whatever we're calling this, on
call it
the importance of that.
Just pipe it into our brains.
That's right.
Yeah.
The other podcast, we're in Blood, Sweat, and Joy. Make sure you look that up in wherever you consume podcasts, Blood, Sweat, and Joy. And we talked about how this food is awful. You should have more.
Yeah, milk specifically.
Yes.
I believe.
How people, how society's forgetting about God, it's making people more and more miserable.
Yeah.
And the secularized culture's response to that is, let's double down and get more secular.
Yeah.
Because that's where happiness is found.
Yeah.
You know, and as far as the lack of God, the decrease in religious practice, there's still people who have a vague sense of like, I'm spiritual.
Right.
It's got an inverse relationship with misery, right? That we're losing this religious practice, we're increasing in misery.
Yeah.
Young people are the canary in the mine.
Yeah.
For this.
Yeah, that's right.
And you've devoted a large chunk of your life. You teach at seminary, which is
awesome.
That's so cool. What a dream job.
Oh, it is a dream job.
Right? Everything's got its own challenges, but so amazing. But you also spent a significant portion of your life with your wife, Annie, ministering to teenagers. So tell us about that ministry and the trends you're seeing as teens lose the ability to contemplate and the increase in teen misery.
Yeah, teen misery, go.
Tell us about Campoitiwa. Shamelessly plug it.
I will shamelessly plug Campoitiwa. Campoitiwa is an apostolate that our family started a whole bunch of years ago now, 17 years ago, something like that. And the idea was we wanted... I always kind of joke about this, and I should stop saying this because it's really shooting me in the foot. Sometimes I regret that we actually called it camp, because camp to me has very specific connotations to people. But we do outdoor education. We do backpacking trips, we do mountaineering and rock climbing and whitewater rafting. There is camp stuff, but we don't have cabins. Everything's actually pretty raw. And the whole pedagogy of Campoitiwa was that we want to put young people into the real world. We want to engross them in reality, which it's so funny talking to you about that now, because 17 years ago or whatever it was when we started it, I mean, the problems were much different 17 years ago. And I'm not, thank you.
Wait, what were you saying? I'm sorry. What was that?
Yeah, exactly.
No, to just get into reality. Yeah.
There weren't, I'm sure there were cell phones.
I'm sorry, did the camera catch the two-shot? Because when I was saying that, I'm not sure they saw me going like this. What were you saying? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, you're absolutely right. So 17 years ago, I think we had cell phones, right? I don't know. I mean, Zach Morris had his giant one and saved that. So they've been around for a while, but we didn't have smartphones, and they actually just made telephone calls at one point, right?
Yeah.
There was a comedian whose name I'm blanking on. I don't even know if he's a good comedian, but he said something. He has some line like, "We've put the entire world in your hands, and the world doesn't love you. which
Wow.
has become kind of this emblematic statement in the last couple days for me.
That's humorous, but like gives me chills. It's so true.
Yeah, and think of what that's doing to young people. We've put the whole world literally in your hand, and the world does not love you.
Literally, constantly telling you
Yeah.
you're not good enough
Yeah,
unless
that's
you
right.
have this pride. I mean, you don't sell things to someone who feels like they're good enough.
No,
Or have
of course
self-worth.
not. No, exactly.
But if I don't have enough worth unless I buy this, I got it, or keeps posting on here.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing that really is getting me. I don't want to be the old man who's griping about technology, but if it was just.
But you are.
I am though. Yeah, so are you.
Own it.
But if it was just, hey, buy this thing, get this new product, do this, we've always kind of had that, and that's
Yeah.
problematic, and I don't like that. But the thing with social media nowadays, and again, I'll get back to campoitiwa and how we're trying to mitigate this
right.
to what degree we can. Our young people, all of us, but our young people in a very acute way are being asked to commodify themselves. It's not simply saying, hey, buy this product, buy this shoe, get this cosmetic, do this thing. It's saying, we want you to pay us so that we can make you a commodity, so that you can basically sell yourself to the world to try to look a certain way, feel a certain way, to be loved in a particular way, right? Which is diabolical. I mean, again,
It's
making us buy stuff is one thing. I'm going to make you sell yourself and pay me to do it, which is, again, what we're doing, and we all fall into it.
And you got to have the perfect filters, or you're not
Exactly
good
right.
enough. You're
Exactly
not
right,
good
because I
enough
had to
as
look a
you
certain
are.
way and do all this stuff. So campoitiwa, the reason we started camp, again, before social media was a
Yeah.
thing or any of this was on the radar screen, my wife and I love the outdoors. We love Jesus Christ. We love being Catholic, and we wanted to combine all those things. I grew up here in Colorado, and I grew up going to these amazing camps, and a lot of them were kind of Protestant-based. Yeah. And I loved being in the outdoors, and I loved associating outdoor adventure with Jesus.
With God, yeah.
I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, and there were some college guys at CU Boulder who became my mentors through my church, and I experienced Jesus Christ through rock climbing and mountain biking with these college guys who loved Jesus and mentored me. And so we wanted to create a program that was like that, but that had the sacraments and that had the fullness of the Catholic faith. And so,
How awesome is that?
but what I didn't see coming was we have a lot of young people who will come to us at the end of a 6-day program or a 9-day program, and a lot of gals especially. We have single-sex programs, but
camp-w.com.
Camp-w.com.
Right?
Yeah, thank you. Camp-w.com. We don't make you
We're not
spell
going to make you spell
Wojtyła.
Wojtyła,
Yeah,
which is
or
John Paul
mispronounce it.
II's name.
Yeah,
Last
before he
name,
was,
before
and
he
the
was.
reason we named ourselves that and not Camp JP2 or something like that, is that when he was young father of Wojtyła and then Bishop Wojtyła, when he was father of Wojtyła, JP2, when Poland was under the control of first the Nazis and then the communists, he would take young people into the wilderness, into the mountains, to be engrossed in the real world, away from all the lies that society was trying to shove down their throats. Because he said, as Jesus shows in the Gospels, we got to go away to pray, away from the noise, away from the voices that are lying to us. He has that famous line, remember when he went back, I think in 1979, he went back to Poland, and he said to the huge crowd of young people, you are not who they say you are.
Let me remind you who you are.
Which is,
one of the
again,
best lines in history.
and I tell the kids every
year,
year, every week when they show up to Camp Wojtyła, I tell them that story, and I say, Jesus wants to remind you of who you are. Their phones don't work. There's no internet reception. There's no cell phone reception. They're actually just engrossed in reality. And it's one of these things that they spend a week in the mountains, either backpacking or doing camp activities or whatever it is, and then they'll go back to wherever they come from in the world, New York or Texas or Florida or California or whatever. And people always talk about going back to the real world. Now I'm going to go back to the real world. And we try to remind them, no, this is the real world. This is where you can hear the voice of God a little bit clearer, where you can see yourself not through a filter on Instagram. You can actually see yourself a little dirtier, a little bit muddier, a little sweatier, but maybe more how God sees
and
you.
maybe beloved at the same time.
Beloved, hopefully.
Yeah.
Praise God, beloved.
We can, no matter how crazy the world is, and what a perfect example. You can always just walk away.
Yeah, that's right.
And most of your problems, frankly,
Yeah.
you can literally I'm going to walk to the Father for a minute.
It's easier said than done, though.
It's
That's
hard,
true,
man.
but
Yeah.
it's hard to do, especially when all of these things are pulling us back.
And there's necessity.
Yeah.
I need to. My
I have to
calendar's
do
on
this.
here. I
Yeah.
have to see the weather.
Yeah, that's
And
and while I'm here, I might as well see
might as
what's
well
going,
see
who's
50 other
yelling at who
things.
on Twitter. Yeah. Well, it's so funny though, and a lot of these kids will come to us at the end of a week, and again, I see it more with the girls in this particular way. Guys have our own stuff that we struggle through and break through with, but I'll see a lot of gals come to my wife especially and say, wow, Annie, I didn't know it before, but I never really knew how to have a conversation with a group of gals before now. Because even at lunch, we're all on our phone or after school, we're all together. Wow. I'm in proximity with a whole lot of people, but I didn't realize that I've never had a real conversation with someone.
Wow.
And I'm shocked by how many times that sentence is said. Because we don't know what we don't know. And that's actually part of the thing about getting away, turning this thing off, removing ourselves from the noise, is because we don't know what we don't know until we're actually there experiencing it. And that's what prayer is all about, right?
And interacting with the Lord, that level of reality that shows us who we are. Like my kids, right. I preach about this many times, how children don't learn who they are by looking in a mirror, but by looking at their parents.
That's right.
As their parents are holding them. Before they can say their names, they learn that I'm beloved, I'm precious. And if a child at that infant stage is distracted by every noise around them and no longer can see the parent, the kid won't learn who they are and how precious they are. And this is what's happening, right? I mean, the stats, share some of these stats and what you're seeing in teen cultures. There's the inability to relate with each other. There's the complete lack of contemplation, because we lose the ability to think deeply. Prayer is going by the wayside. Misery is increasing.
Misery is increasing, and you can kind of make those into the whatever chronological order they sort of exist in. But the reality is, you talked about our experience of culture at the beginning of the show, right? That people aren't praying anymore, and we're all miserable, and that's probably true. But think of what's causing that. I mean, again, if you drill down of what's happening in our culture, what we're seeing, and I don't want to get all academic on us, but I think what we're seeing is the tail end of what philosophers call postmodernism, right? And again,
give us a quick description.
Super quick crash course.
Descriptor of what that is.
This is the most dumbed down, oversimplified.
That's what we like here.
Deep philosophical concept. So after the Enlightenment, kind of toward the Industrial Revolution, if you remember that. I assume you were there because you're an old man.
Totally.
But
back before cell phones.
When I was a kid, and I put my oil into my train. Modernism was this idea. It's connected with what we call humanism, right? And it's this idea. It came out of the Enlightenment. It's a time in history where people are already kind of ticked off at the church, and there was corruption, like there's often corruption in the church, and people see that. And you have the Industrial Revolution, and you have the Enlightenment, and people begin to think, wow, we're capable of a whole lot of stuff. We can build machines, and we can farm on massive scales, and we can build weapons and transportation, and we started to think we don't need God anymore because we are God. We can grow so much food. We don't care what the weather's doing. It doesn't matter what the weather's doing because we can store up and we can make technology so that we don't need that stuff. And so modernism, again, in a grossly oversimplified way, was saying essentially we can do anything. The human experiment is, human flourishing. We're just going to get better and better and better because technology will get better and better and better. And this was sort of the philosophical school. In a lot of ways, and there's something that's okay about that. It's not intrinsically evil. We can do a lot, and God gave us gifts, and He gave us resources to do stuff and invent stuff, and that's awesome. But when it's to the exclusion of God, and the thing that kind of began to shoot that philosophical concept in the foot, first was World War I, where the world saw the most mass, widespread bloodshed we'd ever seen. Partially because of our great technology, and then we saw World War II, and then we saw the Holocaust, and then we saw Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then we saw Stalin and Lenin, and people began to think, wow, all this technology, maybe it's not all it's cracked up to be, and we can just kill people on levels that we never could before, and everyone's still miserable, and we're all still suffering, and it doesn't seem like this grand utopia.
More.
We're suffering more, and utopia has not come. So what we call postmodernism, which I'm weirdly sympathetic to, was trying to pull back the curtain and say, hey, all of these promises about how awesome we are and how awesome technology is, it's a lie. It's like the Wizard of Oz pulling back the curtain and showing that, it's just an old man pulling the levers, right? And that we've been lied to. And it ushers in this philosophical concept that we call deconstructionism. And so because the human spirit was kind of angry, we want to tear everything down. Which you can see kind of the logic and the rationale that led us to that. Like this was a lie, and we've been lied to. And we lump the church into that, and we lump technology into that, we lump politics into that, and we want to deconstruct everything.
And that's full blown right now in society. We are in a mega, the woke movement is a deconstructionist movement.
Whenever you see mass philosophical movements become kind of a caricature of themselves, I think that's how you know they're about to die. And I think what we're seeing in deconstruction is a caricature of deconstructing everything, identity and gender, and it's becoming it's spun out in a way that even the people who originated this school of thought, I think, couldn't have even dreamed of. Picasso, when he was deconstructing art, I don't think saw this coming. And so we're seeing the spinning out of something.
That's a hopeful thought, Scott.
That's exactly why I bring it up, because it tells me we're on the verge of something. Because this is
what seems like the victory cry is actually the death cry.
It's the death gasp. I think.
Yeah, wow. Because again, you look at the world and say, how's it working for you?
Yeah, that's exactly
You were
right.
sharing the stat with me the other day, but
Yeah.
teenage girls, 60% of them
They've
been so sad it's been hard to function.
There was a study that came out from the CDC a couple months ago. It was earlier in 2023. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I mean, they were off the charts. It was so tremendously depressing. More so with high school age girls than boys. Boys too. Boys are struggling too. Everybody's miserable. But with high school age girls, the amount of girls who say that they've contemplated suicide, 1 in 3. The amount of gals who say they've been so depressed they can't do normal activities was like 60%, 50 or 60%, who have been sexually assaulted. Like all of these really horrendous things, which if you trace this study back, they've been doing this study for a long time, from 2011 to now, there's been a skyrocketing of this. Like we've always struggled with mental health. We've always, and that's not to diminish real mental health struggle.
And
which
there's
is
no
real.
shame in it.
None at all.
But the stats are showing us that this
Something
is not all
else.
chemical imbalances.
Right, and so mental health has always been hovering around the same numbers from like the 1950s to the 2000s. And then from 2012 to 2023, it jumps from like 30% to 60% or whatever the number was. And you got to ask yourself, what's happening? And again, high school age girls are seeing this the most. Well, so if 2011 was kind of
something happened.
Something happened in 2012.
Yeah.
And again, there's a sociologist named Jonathan Haidt, and I've read some of his studies on this. He's a Christian guy, and he's fascinating stuff. But he says, what happened in 2012 to make this number just skyrocket up? Well, 2 things happened in 2012. And again, we got to be a little careful putting together things, but
no, there's a big web of
there's a big web of stuff. But 2 things did happen.
This is something you can't overlook.
Yeah. So in 2012 was not the invention of the iPhone. It wasn't when the cell phones came out, but it was number 1, the first forward-facing iPhone. Right. So the first iPhone that had the camera that looked at you. Selfie culture starts, right?
Selfie culture.
It's really hard to take a selfie, with the backwards camera, right? When we were kids, we had the disposable
found a
thing.
way.
You're like, and then you get them developed a month later, and it's a corner of your head, and there's something like, all right, well, I don't know what I look like, but this also makes the idea that you can always see how you look in real time.
Yeah.
Constantly, every moment, I can just look at my phone, I can see exactly how I look. I can look at myself. And again, we're being trained to do this. We're being trained to commodify ourselves that way. Selfie culture, and it's also the birth of Instagram that launches that year, which did kind of change the nature of how social media worked. Now, I'm not trying to vilify these things, but it changes the way that young people, all of us, but young people in a very acute way, look at themselves and are forced to present themselves to the world, and this pressure of I gotta look this way because everybody else looks this way and they're all doing these things and I gotta look this way. It's already hard to be a young person. It's already hard to be a teenager. It's miserable to be a teenager sometimes, right?
Yeah.
We're struggling with our bodies, with our identity, with our personalities, our sexuality, all these things. It's just hard. And then you have an entire culture that's basically saying, with postmodernism, your job, your duty is to deconstruct everything. And you and only you are in control of who you are, what your sexuality is, what your identity is, what your gender is. You have to figure it out.
And
you have
why
to
are
decide.
these kids not happy?
The pressure of that. You have to be your own God.
Yeah.
It's not even a culture that just desperately wants to be God. It's a culture that's saying, again, this is why I think it's spinning out.
Has the burden
you
of being
must
God.
be God.
Yeah.
And then, our kids are all super depressed. They're all contemplating suicide. They're all dealing with sexual abuse because then the pornography issue, you tie all of that into this.
Yeah.
And then you have, again, I'm not saying campoitiwa was the antidote, but we're a tiny sliver of saying, okay, let's just shut it down and go to the wilderness. Let's go to the mountains like Jesus did and breathe. And I can't tell you what it looks like when a kid from the suburbs of the city or whatever can have a second to take a breath and say, okay, I can put that down. And it takes some detoxing days, right?
Yeah.
But then you're like, okay, it's cool. I'm okay.
Yeah, I would say, I don't like saying any one ministry is the antidote other than Real Life Catholic, which is my personal apostolate.
Yeah.
But no, really, I would say, however, what you're doing there is the antidote.
It's not us, but anybody can do that.
But lean into that. I mean, for a kid who goes, they're going to experience campoitiwa as the antidote, frankly. camp-w.com. But really, that golden formula, I think we all need to replicate in our own personal lives, because we're talking about teens, and we all experience the pain of our own divorce from reality.
Right.
That we grow up, we grow past that needing, looking at the Father's face and saying, who am I?
Right.
No, we never get past that. I have to reground myself in that So that formula of whether you're on a camp somewhere as a kid or you're an adult who needs a moment break, everybody has got to flee to reality.
Yeah, that's right.
From this fake, frankly, grinding gears of society that make us forget about God.
Manipulative.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about integration, right? Where does a lot of this stuff stem from? The fact that, and again, the cultural stuff that we can talk about all day. It's a disintegration. My soul, this is what our society talks about. My soul doesn't feel at home in my body. I am disintegrated. And again, to plug campoitiwa up for a little bit, one of the things that frustrated me when I was growing up, and again, there's a place for this, it's fine.
Right.
But when I was growing up, going to camps and stuff, one of the things that frustrated me a little bit was I went to a couple programs where they kind of enticed us and said, come to this camp and you can go mountain biking and rock climbing. You can do all these cool things.
Yeah.
And then at night, they would sit us down and talk about Jesus. And that's fine. And you're like, you do the fun things, and then we talk about Jesus. And I didn't really see what one had to do with the other. And there were times where I even felt like, you just kind of baited me here so that you can tell me about this thing. And I never liked the pedagogy of that, although there's a place for it.
Yeah.
So the whole idea of campoitiwa is integration of both. So I rarely will like get up and give a big talk. Sometimes I'll give a reflection at breakfast or something. But we spend 3 weeks with our college-age staff teaching them to catechize through rock climbing or through mountaineering or through whitewater rafting or through hiking, so that the catechesis is actually connected to what we're doing. And we use the idea of metaphor. How is climbing this mountain? You know, remember that false summit and you were so exhausted, you're like, oh, I thought I was there and then I had to go further. What are those other things back in your high school? You're like, I don't think I can get to the top of this. I don't think I can overcome that thing. I don't think I can, that relationship. Or when you're rock climbing and someone's holding onto the rope, belaying you at the bottom and there's a redundant belayer. What are those things where you just don't feel like God has you? I can't take that risk because no one's got me. No one's going to catch me. And so we try to teach and catechize the Catholic faith through those things so that it's not just, oh, I had a great week out in Colorado. I hope they have a great week in Colorado.
Yeah.
But I hope then that they can go back to wherever they come from and say, oh, I can actually take that principle. I'm not just on a retreat high. I love a good retreat high, but I want them to take it back and say, okay, I can use this principle of finding the metaphors and I can live my spiritual life in this way.
This also inspires a way of evangelizing that I think I got to call parents onto, and I got to remind of myself. I mean, I'm a preacher. This is something I do as a 5% of my time. Most of my time I'm on the road preaching the gospel.
Yeah.
But there's a type of preaching that I think of the monks did throughout the history of the church. They didn't talk a whole lot.
Right.
It was more of a come and see.
Well, it's both.
It's both.
There's both. It should be both.
The
I'm a
church has to do
talker,
both.
man.
We
Let
all
me
do
talk.
both.
Yeah.
You know, Jesus, he preached, and then he constantly would disappear to go pray.
Yeah, that's right.
To say, like, let's experience the mystical together. Let's bring you face to face with the Father, instead of just you hearing about it.
I think of the road to Emmaus a lot, where Jesus, what's he doing? He's hiking with these two disciples and and preaching to them. It's like, let's go on a hike. I'm not just going to sit here. You sit down. I'll be here. Let's go on a hike together. Tell me about what's going on in your life. Tell me where you've lost hope.
Yeah.
And he listens to them and he hears them and he preaches and then he sits down for the Eucharist. But I mean, it's a both and. It's not an either or, and I love that.
So Jesus prayed.
He did. That's from what I hear.
Right.
No, I'm just kidding. Yes,
it's all
did. Of course he prayed.
And like,
yes.
how did he pray? I mean, gosh, I wish we had 3 hours. We have, on the clock, according to the clock, 7 minutes left.
Oh my goodness.
We can always push past
Giddy
a little.
up. Okay.
We can always push past a little bit, and maybe come back and do this again in greater detail. I think one of the greatest takeaways that we can't breeze past, though, is while the scriptures don't tell us a whole lot about what his personal, intimate prayer looked like, the fact that he constantly did it is that's a call to us. Constantly do it.
Yeah, well, here's the thing about Jesus' prayer. Jesus, and he talks about this a lot, so we do know this because he speaks about it a lot, especially in the Gospel of John. Jesus' prayer always stems from his identity as son, right? He talks about, I am in my Father and my Father is in me, and I'm going to give you the Spirit, and that's through the Father. And you know, he's always thinking Trinitarianly.
Is that a word?
I don't.
It is now.
Now it is. But Jesus, I don't want to put words in Jesus' mouth, but Jesus seems to have confidence in his mission, even though he gets so stressed at times he sweats blood. But he recognizes his sonship. My Father knows me. My Father is here. Even on the cross when he says, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? I think he's quoting the Psalms, which say, I know it looks like the Father has forsaken me, but if you read the end of the Psalm, he has not. And he will vindicate me, and I know that, so I can have confidence because I know I am loved, and I know I am in relationship with the Father. And the reason that so many of us, and again, young people in an acute way, are struggling with, we don't know how to pray, we can't pray, we don't pray, we're miserable, is because we don't see ourselves as loved. We don't see ourselves in relationship to the Father. There was the same kind of week I was reading about that study with all the stats on teen mental illness and teen depression. There was this thing happening in a small Christian school in Kentucky called the Asbury Revival. And it was these college students who spent like a month. They were at a chapel service one morning and they didn't leave. And they just stayed there for like weeks and they kept worshiping and praying.
Asbury Revival.
Yeah, and like 50,000 people were like, hey, we want to know what's happening with these college students and we're going to show up. And 50,000 people went to this tiny college in Kentucky to pray with these people. And a bunch of, like famous TikTok preachers and celebrity people came and they're like, we're so happy you're here. Grab a pew. Like, we're not going to give you the pulpit.
I was turned away.
You were turned away like 7 times. It was very embarrassing for all of us.
Like, come on, man, this is for the gram. It's got to go on there.
Well, everybody wanted to get their picture.
Yeah, totally.
But the thing that sparked it, there was a faculty member, I guess, who was giving the kind of reflection that morning or preaching that morning. And I remember hearing that he had just gotten off a plane. He hadn't prepared what he was going to say that morning. He kind of threw something together. And he talked about love. He talked about the Father's love. And he talked about how so few of us have experienced a kind of unconditional love that's not trying to manipulate us or wants to get something from us. And we talk a lot about the Father's love, but have we really experienced pure, complete, unconditional love? And at the end, he's like, as a kind of an altar call, stand up and come forward if you've never felt that kind of love, because the Father wants to give it to you. And 18 people went up and said, we want to experience that. And then they didn't leave, and they stayed for weeks. And I was reading about that as I was reading the CDC study and saying, we're all, again, the canary in the coal mine, they're just demonstrating what we all already know, which is that we are desperate to be seen, not through our Instagram filter, we're desperate to be seen by a Father who loves us. And it's killing us. Like, it's literally killing us. The suicide rates are astronomical. It's killing us. And until we recognize and see ourselves as the Father sees us, because that was the heart of Jesus' prayer, we're not going to get it. And maybe the last thing to say about Jesus' prayer, I don't know a whole lot about how Jesus prayed. We get a couple insights, right? When the agony in the garden, we get some insight. The transfiguration, we get some insight, right? Where he's speaking to the Father, and I don't know when you pray, Old Testament figures don't appear when I'm praying, but they do when Jesus prays. He lights up. But I want to say a word about the most famous prayer in Judaism, which I guarantee Jesus would have prayed every day, probably a couple times a day.
The Shema.
It's the Shema, right? Shema means listen or hear. And the Shema prayer in the Jewish tradition, it's what every mother would whisper in her newborn infant's ear when they were born. And it's what every old person wants whispered on their deathbed before they die. It's meant to be the inclusio of the whole life of faith. And I'll just take a second with it because
I got to point this out too. Everyone's Bible should look a little more like this. This is a dude who reads his Bible. Okay. Go ahead, sorry.
It's seen some stuff.
I think you're missing a couple books.
I'm missing most of Genesis,
You pulled a Martin Luther and just ripped one of the books out.
Nicely done.
No offense to my Lutheran friends who are watching.
No comment on that.
But okay.
But this is a prayer that you probably heard before. Most of your listeners have probably heard this before. It says, "Hear, O Israel, Shema Ya Yisrael." Here is Shema. That's what it's called.
You're showing off now with that one.
A little bit. So, hear, O Israel, and this is really this is like the constitutional, foundational faith statement of Israel. This is the centerpiece. The whole Bible, you can kind of zero it in on this statement. This is how the Jews saw themselves. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. It's the first statement of monotheism in the world. There's one God. He's one Lord. That is what makes Israel Israel. The Lord our God is one Lord. So you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your might. And these words which I command you this day shall be on your heart. And it says, teach them to your children, and put them on your doorposts, and think of them when you wake up and when you go to sleep. Think of this all the time. But just to kind of close us, those three words that the Shema prayer uses, I want to pick them apart on what they say in Hebrew, because sometimes when you translate something, you miss a little bit of the sense of it, right? The words mean what they mean, and Scripture is inspired and without error, but I think there's some depths that we can plumb. So just real quick, hear, O Israel, the Lord is one Lord. So what should you do? Love the Lord with all your heart. When most of us hear the word heart, we think of our emotions, right? The seat of our emotions. You don't have a heart. You're heartless. You're mean. I think of the Hallmark Channel, and I think of sappy English poetry, and I don't know if the Hallmark Channel is one of your sponsors, but they're probably not anymore.
Yeah, great.
I
thanks.
watch
just lost millions.
all
I just lost
300
millions
of their
dollars.
Christmas movies every year with my wife, so it's fine. But there's a very emotional idea of heart. But that's not what levav in Hebrew means. Levav, and actually the Catechism of the Catholic Church has a beautiful, in the last section, has a beautiful reflection on levav, which means the place, the dwelling place where I meet with God, the sanctuary within, where I choose life or death, where I choose who I am going to be in relation to God. Will I follow him? Will I not? So it's more akin to what we might think of as the will, right? Decide. So if you're going to love the Lord your God, love him with all of your decision. Make a willful choice that you will follow and love and be with God with all of your heart. So make a choice. And then it says with all your soul, which is the Hebrew word nephes, N-E-P-H-E-S. And nephes, I don't know about you, I've always been bugged by this line, because what does it mean to love the Lord with my soul? Where's your soul? Oh, it's the immaterial part of my being. I'm going to really put my soul. Like, what is that? That doesn't mean anything. We say things like this. Put your soul into it. What is the soul? But nephes in Hebrew is actually more akin to our personality, our idiosyncrasies, our weird baggage that we carry, our heartbreaks, our joys, right? That weird thing that you did right before the show started that I won't bring up, that comment you keep making about the couch, right? All of our silliness, right?
All to you, Lord. Yeah,
Give all of it, but it says your nephes, like the weird things that make Christefanick, give them all to the Lord and decide this day to do it.
You can see when someone's praying with that relaxed spirit, not irreverent.
Not irreverent, but
they're themselves before the Lord.
Themselves before the, which Jesus does. We see Jesus doing that in the garden, right? And then it says with all your might. And in Hebrew, that's actually not really a word. It's the term meod, which is more akin to 5 exclamation points. So in other words, all the way, in totality,
energy,
exclamation point, exclamation point,
focus.
exclamation point. And so Jesus prays this when he wakes up. He prays this when he goes to bed. He prays it when he was born. He hears his mom and his dad saying it again and again. And so what does it mean to love the Lord with all of your will and your decision, with all of the things that make you you, in totality? And I think this is what we see on the cross. We see the visible manifestation of Jesus' prayer. The visible manifestation of this statement.
Brother,
embodied in him.
I'm grateful for your friendship.
Yeah,
Thanks for being in
likewise,
my
man.
small group.
Thank you.
And I'm grateful for you're an incredible teacher.
Thanks, Chris.
So
are you.
thanks for sharing that gift with everybody.
Likewise. Likewise. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah. Friends, Jesus loves you so much. Go to him in prayer. You know, and I don't feel bad when life is stressing you out. When you feel like you're just losing yourself in the gears of it all, it's really comforting. And it was really comforting you said this today. Jesus felt so much stress at one time, he sweat blood. You're probably not going to feel that much stress, but you are going to feel the stress of like, I have to provide for a family, I have to drive the kids to school. That's actually not unholy. Maybe you're bearing your share of the cross in life, and life has got you going crazy, but you need to do what Jesus did. He did this to show you what you need to do. Is that whether, if you can go to campoitiwa, camp-w.com, great. Every one of us in our lives, wherever we're at, can go to the inner room of the heart and look at the Father.
That's right.
And in that moment, as we love him with our soul and bring our whole personality and strength and focus, we don't just remember who God is. We remember as we look at him loving us on the cross, you remember in those moments who we are. You can't afford, you might be too busy, you can't afford to go through your day, wasting your day, your focus, your life, your memory of who you are and what it's all about. You can't afford to go through life without wasting that time with God. We love you. Thanks for wasting time with us today. Thanks, brother. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Chris.
Man, wasn't that great? Listen, if you don't want to be happy, be sure not to subscribe. But if you want a more joyful life, the kind of life that God created you for, the kind of life Jesus promised when he said, I came to give you life to the full, then make sure you hit subscribe and share this channel with everybody you know.